Danganronpa. The name itself, a Japanese portmanteau of Dangan meaning bullet and Rompa meaning to refute, hardly does an apt job of explaining what the hell this game is. To sum it up in a way that is most pop culturally relevant would be to describe it as Phoenix Wright meets The Hunger Games meets anime. A potent combination for a certain type of person, and that certain type of person just so happens to be me. I absolutely adore this series. It is depressing and morbid, but most importantly, it is intriguing. You start each game as a student who wakes up with no memory of how you got where you are, surrounded by similarly disposed classmates. You are then assailed by a talking teddy bear called Monokuma, who decrees that you are now part of a killing game where you all have to murder each other. If someone is murdered, you have a class trial, and depending on if you figure out who the culprit is, either they walk free and everyone else is killed, or they are summarily executed for being found out. Sounds fun, right? While the main gameplay in the series hews closer to Phoenix Wright, there is a sprinkling of Persona in here too. You'll have free time where you can hang out with other students and give them gifts to raise your relationship. This of course becomes even more depressing if that one student you were building a friendship with ends up being a murderer and is killed. The class trials are where the juicy twists and reveals happen, and despite the varying quality of the minigames you play during these sections, the narrative payoff is well worth the minimal frustration. I stand by the fact that Danganronpa V3 has the most insane ending to anything I have experienced in fiction. Full stop, end of sentence. I included the full series on this list as similar to Phoenix Wright, they are all connected. You need to start from the beginning to relish the full experience, but it is well worth doing so. There is nothing quite like Danganronpa, and that's what makes it so amazing. The intersection of narrative and gameplay is something that this industry constantly struggles with. Whether it be debates over the mass murderous Nathan Drake and the narrative dissonance that results from shooting a million bad guys in the Uncharted series, or the endless open world of The Witcher 3, where you can wander off the beaten path for hours despite having a story that is all about urgency and necessity. Video games find it hard to pair what they're trying to say with what they have the player do. Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons sticks in my mind for many reasons. It is a gorgeous fairy tale world that takes you to stunning locations. It tells a story with no dialogue, using gestures and animation to build character and personality. And most important of all, it uses a unique control scheme where you play as both brothers simultaneously. The way in which the very idea of control and character are paired leads to moments unlike any I have experienced in games before. It would spoil the experience to speak of them, so I won't, but suffice it to say that this game understands the link between playing a game and telling a story better than most of the greatest games ever made. And who would have thought that a small independent release, helmed by a man who had a background in film and not in games, would give us one of the best examples of how to achieve this. Sometimes you need that outside perspective to innovate, and innovate they certainly did. Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons is filled with vibrant landscapes, dotted with fun interactions, and peppered with simple yet clever puzzles. But it will always stick with me for the ways it boldly challenged conventions and garnered emotion in the most unexpected of ways. I never used to like first-person shooters. As a kid, I didn't grow up with Half-Life or Halo. I didn't play on Xbox or PC. I was a happy, fun-loving Nintendo boy who played Pokemon and Smash Brothers and whatever other ball of sunshine that was thrown at me. This is to say that when the Call of Duty fad came around, I was less than impressed. I didn't understand why people preferred grey and brown to blue and orange. However, as I got older and started branching out my tastes, I started to become comfortable with the idea of trying an FPS. I bought the GoldenEye remake on Wii and dabbled with Metroid Prime 2 on GameCube, but it wasn't until Titanfall that I fell in love with a first-person shooter. Titanfall, a game by Respawn Entertainment, a company formed from the ashes of a turbulent battle between ex-Infinity Ward veterans and publisher Activision. These were the guys who invented the modern first-person shooter. The genre that dominated the Xbox 360 generation was defined by the multiplayer innovation of Vince Zampella and friends. Titanfall and its sequel are everything I want from a first-person shooter. 1. It doesn't make me motion sick. 2. You can double jump. 3. You can wall run. 4. This is basically a platformer. If you've heard my list so far, you know that I pride games based on how good it feels to move. And boy howdy is Titanfall the king of movement in first person. Momentum has never felt so good. There is a laundry list of elements that makes this series so appealing to me. It has a gun that auto-locks to targets, which allowed me to get comfortable with aiming early on. Its main multiplayer mode fills the maps with bots that give you points for killing them, letting worse players contribute to the team. It has goddamn Titans, which completely changes how you approach the game, creating 2 modes of play that are equally enjoyable. From the outside looking in, I can see how you could pass off Titanfall as yet another FPS, but it really isn't. It does so much to innovate and change the genre, while maintaining an incredible feel that honestly hasn't been matched. I'm not the biggest fan of 2D Mario. That should be apparent by the fact that there's only one other 2D Mario game on this list, and it's from the Game Boy. The classics that everyone loves, like Mario 3 and Mario World, they're fine, but I never connected with them. The design of a typical Mario level just doesn't tend to jive with me, and as such, I don't hold the NES and Super Nintendo games in high regard. Super Mario Maker, however, was a completely different beast. I wasn't that excited after its initial announcement. Why would I want to make levels for a platforming series that I wasn't really a huge fan of? But then E3 2015 happened, and Nintendo put on their big tournament to show off the game, and that's when everything changed. Here were levels that weren't really Mario levels. They took ideas from other games, Metroidvanias, puzzle games, even Meat Boy-esque design with tight jumps and precision controls. As soon as I saw the possibilities, my eyes were opened. I remember spending 8 hours straight working on my Metroid level, tweaking it, iterating on it, finding fun ways to incorporate music and progression. It is true that you don't understand just how hard game design is until you try it for yourself. Making something that isn't too hard, has a coherent theme, and has a clear arc of progression is incredibly difficult. There are thousands of Mario Maker levels out there, and most of them are bad, which is testament to how tricky good level design can be. But the real joy of Mario Maker is seeing your level played by someone else. Whether it be sending it to a friend and relishing in the failure and frustration that they find in your devilish contraption, or giving a code to a streamer and delighting at the joy they express when figuring out one of your puzzles. Mario Maker is as much about your experience outside the game as it is within it. The Wii U was a console designed for Mario Maker, and it still is. If this game ends up being that system's greatest legacy, then it was honestly worth it. Valkyria Chronicles is the story of a game that had loomed over me as a shadow for years. I had heard people wax lyrical about this tactics game, not only when talking about how it inspired codename Steam, but also in conversations about the best strategy games out there. I remember picking it up for about £4 in a Steam sale, and then leaving it sitting in my library for years. What a mistake that was! because as soon as I picked up this anime version of World War II, I knew I should have played it sooner. Fundamentally, it's a blend between shooter and strategy game, but it feels so much its own thing. You don't level up individual units like Fire Emblem, but rather level up classes of units, meaning that if your scouts are level 7, all your scouts are level 7. It's a streamlining that works tremendously well, and gets you excited to upgrade. The battles themselves are so well considered in terms of their map design and enemy placement. The unique thing about movement is that you will get hit by enemies in real time during your turn. They won't just stop shooting you because it's a turn-based game, adding real stakes to how and where you move your units. Yes, you can overpower Alicia and just one turn every level in the game with some broken scout tactics, but to be honest, there was a joy to finding ways to break Valkyria Chronicles. It's also a game that allows you to be strategically creative. One of my favourite moments from early on in the game is when I came across a tank that I just couldn't take down. Its weak point was constantly facing away from me, so getting my units to the end of the level unscathed felt almost impossible. So what did I do? I took my own tank, parked it sideways in front of the enemy tank, and used it as a barrier to block its gun and allow my units to pass by it without a scratch. It is moments like this that make Valkyria Chronicles so fulfilling, and ultimately why it stands the test of time as a truly brilliant strategy game. I've always loved music, though these days I unfortunately find less and less time for it. I grew up enjoying singing, playing piano, and finding my own musical niches that were outside the mainstream radio hits. My tastes ranged from pop punk to hard rock to metal, and there was no better game to give me artists that spoke to my sensibilities than Guitar Hero 3. If we're being honest, Guitar Hero 3 is probably the second most important video game that I've ever played. It was the game that convinced me I should actually play the guitar and learn it for myself. In terms of life impact, not many games can claim such a feat. The first time I ever saw this game was at Bally's house. He hopped onto Muse's Knights of Sidonia on medium and proceeded to hit every note that ran down the highway. I was in awe. How could somebody even do what he was doing? In hindsight, as someone who now completes Dragon Forces Through the Fire and Flames on hard with relative ease, this reaction feels rather quaint. However, I knew from that day forward that I had to own this game, and I had to become as good as Bally was. The fact of the matter was, I got better than Bally by some margin, and then learned the actual instrument itself, so there's a lesson in motivation for you. But Guitar Hero 3 still remains my favourite in the series for a multitude of reasons. The tracklist is filled with bands that would become some of my favourites, from Muse to Paramore to Metallica. It really was a murderer's row of artists that I loved. The difficulty levels felt perfectly pitched as I progressed from easy to medium to hard, and in some cases expert, and ultimately the songs were incredibly fun to play. There is something about the way the note high waves were designed that was just perfect. It never got better than these songs in any game in the series, in terms of pure fun when tapping out the patterns. Guitar Hero 3 not only shaped my taste in music, it made me better at music, and that really is something special. NES games are bad. They just are. Argue with me till the cows come home, but 98% of NES games suck. I of course have to say 98% because I've included a couple of them on my list. Mega Man 2 is one of those games, and not only does it not suck, it is one of the best games ever made. The soundtrack is still absolutely stellar. I could listen to Wily's Castle stage music till the end of time and not get bored of it. The Robot Masters are also memorable, with their stages offering such unique challenges and mechanics. I think games that make an impact on your memory are so important because as someone who plays a lot of games, there is so much that is forgettable. It's a testament to the quality of this game that so much of it stays in my mind. Of course, that could partially be due to the fact that I've played Mega Man 2 so many times, I can't even count them. I remember staying over at Bally's place in Brussels and beating it there. I just ran through it recently before my friend's wedding as everyone else was getting ready. Mega Man 2 stays with me because it's a game that is just so easy to pick up, play through, and feel satisfied. Now here's the contradiction. Mega Man 2 has a lot of bullshit in it. It truly does, and yet once you know the game, once you're familiar with the weapons and what counters what, it actually becomes an incredibly smooth experience. It helps that this game had a normal difficulty added for the Western release, which makes it so much easier than a game like Mega Man 3. There is no better feeling than having the metal blades and being able to bust through so many enemies and bosses with them. They are clearly overpowered, but they actually make Mega Man 2 a much more enjoyable time. I don't know if Mega Man will ever be as good as this again, but even if it never is, we'll always have Mega Man 2. Earthbound fans are amongst the most evangelical fans in the world. They're a group of people who have been downtrodden for so long. Forever, Nintendo hadn't re-released the game, and we are still living in a world where Mother 3 has yet to be given a Western version. I knew how much people loved Earthbound, but I also knew people who didn't love it so much. It seemed to be a polarizing game, so I went into it with an open mind and hoped to take something from it. But boy, did I come out the other side just as evangelical as any Earthbound fan out there. And I finally understand why. There really aren't many games like Earthbound. Sure, it inspired Undertale, and in many ways it was the spiritual precursor to Pokemon, but Earthbound stands out as a wholly unique game. In an era where Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest ruled the RPG roost, Earthbound was an experience that dared to be different. You play as a group of kids going from town to town, in a setting that is more akin to our own world than any other. Of course, there is a heavy dose of weirdness, but ultimately this game is about friendship and growing up in a constantly changing world. It takes stances on and pokes fun at topics like politics and religion in a way that games of the 16-bit era never did, and it surprises the player at almost every turn. It innovates in so many ways, be it auto-killing enemies that you are too overpowered for, or allowing you to heal even if you've been hit by a killing blow because of its slot machine-esque rolling HP system. It is a funny game, and so full of weird and hilarious characters. I remember trying to read the bus stop sign from the wrong side in one of the early towns, and it told me, "Danger, you are in the road." It is that level of care and attention to detail that makes Earthbound stand apart from other games in the genre. I also love the characters and how differently they play in battle. From Paula's focus on magic to Jeff's totally unique item-based moveset, everyone feels distinct and useful in their own way. I could go on and on about the various eccentricities that make Earthbound such an excellent adventure, but at its core, it's a game that is filled with heart and carried by hope. There is no such thing as objectivity in video games. It's why I think it's ridiculous that people ask for objective reviews as if an opinion can be anything but subjective. That said, if you were to ask me from as objective a standpoint as possible what the best RPG ever made is, I would answer you with Chrono Trigger every single time. However, Chrono Trigger isn't even the highest ranking RPG on my list, and so we arrive back at my initial assessment that opinions are indeed subjective. I do dearly love Chrono Trigger though, and consider it the greatest achievement of the Super Nintendo era. Here is a game that I would recommend to anyone who likes RPGs, and could almost guarantee that they would have a good time with it. It feels incredibly modern to this day because of how forward-thinking it was at the time. Unused party members still gain experience, something which 2 decades later is still an issue in games. Here's looking at you, Octopath Traveler. The switch between running around the world and combat is seamless with no black loading screens. It was one of the first games to implement a New Game Plus mode with a multitude of different endings. And perhaps most importantly of all, Chrono Trigger is lean. In a world of 100-hour games, the fact that you can get in and out of one of the best RPGs of all time in around 20 hours is so important in this day and age. But the best parts of this game are all to do with the world and characters. It's a time travel adventure that sees you journey to the distant future, the prehistoric past, and everything in between. This lineup of characters is so incredibly diverse, coming from different time periods and perspectives. By the end of the game, you'll be able to undertake individual side missions with each of them that fleshes out their stories further. The combat itself is worthy of mention as it combines classic ATB with individual character abilities in such a seamless way. The idea that every character in the game has unique special moves that they can only perform with specific other characters means that the room for experimentation is vast. And because your characters level pretty evenly, the game encourages you to switch up your party to try different combinations. I grew up loving Dragon Ball Z, and so I love the Akira Toriyama character designs. And the soundtrack is so iconic that even if you've not played the game, you've probably heard it before at some point. I'll never call a game flawless, but damn, if Chrono Trigger isn't close. I grew up playing Harvest Moon: A Wonderful Life on the GameCube. If this was a list based on nostalgia, that game would probably be pretty high up the list. Maybe even in this spot. But in the intervening years, Harvest Moon fell off. I think I grew up in the golden era of the franchise, with Friends of Mineral Town on GBA, a game I never owned but many people I knew did, and is widely considered the best in the franchise. Stardew Valley is truly the spiritual successor to the GBA classic, and not only succeeds in replicating its formula, but exceeding it in almost every way. Addictive is a bad word, and one that I don't think should be applied to video games, but Stardew Valley is a game that comes close to having such a moniker applied to it. The game is compelling in every manner. It sets up such freedom for the player and so many options that, combined with a time-limited and ability-limited structure, you'll just want to keep playing the next day and the next day and the next day until you realise that there really is no stopping this train. By slowly building up your farm through acquisition of animals and growing of crops, you feel the sense of accomplishment whilst also having your own personal goals. What do you want your farm to look like? Are you going to decorate it in a specific way? This isn't something that the game rewards you for or necessarily pushes you towards, but I remember seeing someone else's pristine farm while playing and being motivated to make my own to try and rival such an impressive feat. The thing you realise is that all the systems in this game are connected. Going down into the mines will let you gain valuable resources like diamonds, which can then be put into a cloning machine resulting in a diamond farm. But these gems can also be used for gifts, as you can increase your relationship with every person who lives in the small town. Or you can even donate rare gems to the museum, which will house an ever-growing collection of these artifacts. There are so many things to do, and though it can sound overwhelming, it rarely is. The chill soundtrack and bright pixel art make it one of the most relaxing video games out there. If you need some respite from life stresses, Stardew Valley provides a wonderful escape.